on NCN for this special broadcast. My name is Shaquan Gill, and I have with me in studio financial analyst Joel Bagwandin as we discuss a key and important issue that has been permeating the media for quite some time. Mr. Bagwandin, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me here, Shukwan.
Now, we've recognized in the media this contention that was raised, first of all, by Mr. Christopher Ram, that the Natural Resources Fund is somehow overstated by more than $270 billion. Is there any truth to that statement?
So, thank you for that question and to deal with this issue in a frontally matter. As you would have recognized from the media, I myself and including the Attorney General responded to Christopher Ram. And in my response, I described it as a storm in a teacup. And it is a storm in a teacup because for someone of Christopher Ram's stature, who is a seasoned chartered accountant and who has been producing budget analysis, the national budget that is, for more than 2 decades, who appear to be totally oblivious or unfamiliar with the financial laws of the country, it is very disappointing for him to make such a claim. Now, in my response, I described his claim as an aspersion because it is not grounded in any fact. It is not grounded in any proper reasoning or any proper analysis, and he's ignored the fundamental the principal financial laws in relation to this issue. So what is his contention, or his aspersion as I termed it? He is contending that pursuant to the Petroleum Agreement 2016, Article 15 states that the government has to effectively remit to the Commissioner General, the Guyana Revenue Authority, taxes in accordance with the tax laws, Companies Act and the tax laws of Guyana, to the GRE, representing the contractor's share of taxes paid. And in so doing, the government has to issue, the GRA has to issue a certificate showing that they have complied with that.
Yeah.
But he's singularly pointed out that particular subsection in the Petroleum Agreement in isolation from the principal subsection of that article, Article 15, which states that the oil companies, the contractor, are exempted from paying any taxes, VAT included, corporate taxes included. So effectively, the oil companies, pursuant to the Petroleum Agreement, they are exempted from paying taxes. And that is because, again, pursuant to the Petroleum Agreement, they pay 2% royalty and a 50% in profit share to the government. That is what the state receives in accordance with the agreement. So he's singularly looking at it from that perspective, ignoring Article 15.1 of the agreement that states it's a tax exemption. So it is a nil effect. He goes on to argue that, notwithstanding that, the taxes that is reflected in the certificate or reflected on the certificate that the contractors receive, in this case ExxonMobil Guyana, that amount of money which is placed in the Natural Resources Fund has to be in the consolidated fund. And that is his main contention, and the manner in which he argued his case gives one the impression that this is a major violation of some law, or the government has committed a major violation of some law or some legislation. But that is not the case. The And in my response, I pointed to the Principal Act, which is the Fiscal Management and Accountability Act. The Fiscal Management and Accountability Act, and let me, I will read, I will quote verbatim from the Act, which he ignored completely and totally. The Fiscal Management and Accountability Act provides for public monies, what is referred to as public monies, or what is classified as public monies, in accordance with the Fiscal Management and Accountability Act. Public monies can be held in one of three places. Firstly, the consolidated fund. Secondly, a deposit fund. Thirdly, an extra budgetary fund. Now, let me read the Act verbatim. It says, Section 37 establishes the definition for the classification of public monies. Accordingly, Section 37(1) states that all public monies shall be classified as either A. Received monies, B. Monies in the consolidated fund, including any monies in the contingencies fund, C. Monies in an extra budgetary fund, D. Drawn monies, or E. Monies in a deposit fund. 37(2) goes on to state that all public monies shall be deemed to be received monies from the time they become public monies until the time that they are credited to the consolidated fund, an extra budgetary fund, or a deposit fund. Those are the exact words quoted from the Act, which he ignored. So what is my argument, which is grounded based on my analysis and my understanding and interpretation of the Principal Act, which is the Fiscal Management and Accountability Act? The Natural Resources Fund is essentially an extra budgetary fund. So it doesn't have to be placed in the consolidated fund. The Fiscal Management and Accountability Act provides for it to be placed, for monies to be placed in either a fund, deposit fund, a consolidated fund, or an extra budgetary fund. The Natural Resources Fund is an extra budgetary fund. Now let me read from the Act what the Act states about an extra budgetary fund. The Act states that Section 39(1) establishes that an extra budgetary fund may be created by an act which legislation shall set out. Now that act is the Natural Resources Fund Act. And it goes on to state A, legislation shall set out A, the officials who will undertake the financial management of the extra budgetary fund, including the responsibilities and accountabilities of the officials charged with the managing of the extra budgetary fund. B, the banking arrangements that pertain to the extra budgetary fund. C, the source or sources of public monies to be credited to the extra budgetary fund. D, the accounting rules and auditing requirements applicable to the extra budgetary fund. And E, the financial reporting requirements applicable to the extra budgetary fund, including the reporting of financial performance both during and at the end of each fiscal year. One last citation from the Act. 37(4) states that, subject to any other law, resources of an extra budgetary fund may be administered either through its own accounts in selected banks pre-approved by the minister or through the payment and banking services of the consolidated fund, but shall be accounted for separate and apart from any other resources. Now let me translate all of that I've just quoted verbatim from the Fiscal Management and Accountability Act to the operations of the Natural Resources Fund. The Natural Resources Fund was established by virtue of the Natural Resources Fund Act. The Natural Resources Fund Act, in institutionalizing and operationalizing the Natural Resources Fund, provides for the governance structure or mechanism. That is, it constitutes a board of directors, it constitutes an investment committee, it constitutes an accountability committee. The responsibility for the operational management of the fund is vested with the Bank of Guyana, which is the central bank, and it comes ultimately under the oversight of the National Assembly. In accordance with the Natural Resources Fund Act, withdrawals from the fund, the Act prescribed the withdrawal rules. So withdrawals from the fund have to firstly be pre-approved through the national budget. Now these are the highest, what I would regard the highest level of accountability and transparency in terms of governance of the fund, operations and management altogether of the fund. Because you can't take a direct charge from the Natural Resource Fund. The consolidated fund, which is governed by the Fiscal Management and Accountability Act, which comes under the scrutiny and oversight of the National Assembly, which means the government cannot withdraw monies from the consolidated fund without the approval of the Parliament, the National Assembly. So the withdrawals from the Natural Resources Fund has to be pre-approved based on the previous year's fiscal balance through the national budget before and then transferred to the consolidated fund before it can be withdrawn effectively. So the contention that the monies have to be placed on the consolidated fund, the monies are transferred to the consolidated fund, but in accordance with the law, in accordance with two principal acts, the FMA Act, which is the Fiscal Management and Accountability Act, and the Natural Resources Fund Act. So those are the argument upon which, to my mind, I would say to disprove the aspersions of Christopher Ram, because he ignored altogether the Fiscal Management and Accountability Act. And I would say this, that I want to emphasize the disappointment, because I can't understand how is it he ignored the Fiscal Management and Accountability Act to make such an outlandish allegation or aspersion. And it tells me that when I listened to him, he went on a program to further amplify his arguments on one of the radio stations in Guyana. And I listened to him. And the perspective, his perspective, how he interprets this, is from a very basic bookkeeping kind of perspective, bookkeeping, accounting. And I say this because I want to make the point explicitly for the viewers to understand the perspective, which is narrowly focused from a seasoned chartered accountant such as Mr. Ram, versus the operation of this matter, versus how these issues ought to be treated in accordance with the laws, the financial laws. While in financial management and accounting generally, the principles and the fundamentals are the same, whether it's private sector, whether it's public sector, or whether it is on a household level. However, there are differences. There are major differences in terms of the accounting policies and accounting rules. Principles are the same, but policies and rules differ. That applies to the private sector and that applies to public sector accounting and financial management practice. And the difference is this. Let me explain this. Christopher Ram is accustomed to, he's more familiar with private sector accounting practices. And private sector and sole trader type businesses, the accounting practices are not enshrined, and the policies, the rules and policies are not enshrined in the law. They are not backed by a law or a legislation or legislations. Public accounting, however, is governed by laws. Accounting rules and accounting policies are governed by In this case, the Fiscal Management and Accountability Act, which is the principal act. There's a big difference. And so everything that the government undertakes in terms of public accounting, in terms of public policy making and public budgetary receipt of funds, withdrawal of funds, and expenditure of funds, it ought to be done in accordance with the law, not in accordance with a bookkeeping type of accounting, which in some cases they don't even adhere to the established rules by practice. And so that's the distinction I want to draw for the audience benefit, the perspective that he's coming from, and what is the reality, what is the fact, how these things are operated, not in his narrow, focused lens, and he's not seeing, the bigger picture, the bigger framework. He's not grounding his analysis in the broader framework, taking into account the laws.
Mr. Bagundin, I wanted to ask you as well, before we conclude our interview for today. There was another article that was penned some time ago, particularly in the Peeping Tom article column of the Kaicho News, which spoke to the assertion that the the interest, that comes from our oil and gas revenues would have been enough to ensure that there was a 13% increased payment to public servants in salaries and wages. Can you speak to that in any way? Is that something that from your analysis, can happen?
Again, I have to draw attention to the legal operation of the Natural Resources Fund. For the viewer's benefit, that argument, which I responded to, and I saw Chronicle did an editorial from my response that they published yesterday. The economic advisor to the leader of the opposition contends that the interest earned on the Natural Resources Fund is enough to pay several times more the increase that the government paid the public sector employees. And he did not quantify how much is that several times, whether it's 2 times or 3 times or 4. He said several times. Then the vice president in his press conference, he addressed the matter frontally, where he pointed out the interest earned in the fund for 2022 was only $2.4 billion. The increase, the 6.5% increase, actually amounted to nearly $8 billion. Evidently, that's not, the 2.4 billion is not enough to pay $8 billion. Yet, the economic advisor and Peeping Tom, they're arguing that, the interest could pay several times more. Then, Peeping Tom, in defense of the economic advisor, after the vice president disproved that, evidently, they're saying that the vice president committed a rudimentary error. But when I examine what they were talking about, it is not a rudimentary error of any sort. The fact is that whoever is the author of Peeping Tom and the economic advisor, they have committed a fundamental error. And this is based on the fact that what they have argued, they have completely, like Christopher Ram, completely ignored the Natural Resources Fund Act. And it is an impractical argument. It demonstrates that they have no knowledge of financing, or public financial management, or accounting, or economics. So let me explain, let me demonstrate that. They are saying that the interest earned in the fund from the inception. Now, when was this fund established? The fund was established in 2021. So from the inception to now, let's say use the last fiscal year, which was last year, 2023, the interest earned was $16.1 billion. So they're saying $16.1 billion is more than the $8 billion. But that $16.1 billion is cumulative. In 2021, 2022, the interest earned in 2022 was 2.4 billion. The interest earned in 2023 was 12.5 billion. So cumulatively, it amounted to 16.1 billion. So firstly, you can't take cumulative interest earned over multiple years to pay a recurrent expenditure annually. That's the first nonsensical argument. Secondly, in accordance with the Natural Resources Fund Act, the Act prescribes how withdrawals are to be effected. Prescribed, it's prescriptive, it is rule based. And so the withdrawal is based on the balance of the fund for the preceding year for the next fiscal year. So, for example, the withdrawal from the Natural Resources Fund to finance the 2023 budget would have been based on the 2022 balance, and hence the Vice President was correct when he was looking at the interest earned for 2022, because that is what would have been available for withdrawal in 2023, the 2.4 billion. For 2024, the budget that will soon be tabled in the National Assembly, this budget the 2023 balances, ending balance, would be available for withdrawal in this. So that is a fundamental error, a fundamental mischaracterization, error, and understanding altogether of how the fund is operated and how it's managed. They have to read the law, they have to read the act and understand it and apply it.
Yeah. Mr. Bagundin, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation with us today. Anything you want to leave with our viewers, especially in relation to the quality of content that is out there, that they read and consume? If there's any comment you'd like to make in terms of what they consume.
Well, we are living in an information age. This is the era of the internet, technology, and information is there in abundance. But our population is growing smarter and smarter every day. The education, and based on government policies as well, in terms of scholarship, making education more and more accessible. We're where we are today compared to where we were 3 decades ago. We can safely say that we have a smarter population. So what I would say to the viewers, the people, the population, don't take people's word for gospel. You do your own assessment. Everybody have a mind of their own, and all these things, almost every one of these, these allegations, these outlandish claims, these egregious claims, they can be easily disproven because they can be easily verified. Everybody have access to the internet. You can easily go on the internet, identify the sources, look at these things for yourself. You don't have to get a first degree or a master's degree to do these things. It's very basic, very easily.
Yeah. Mr. Bagundin, thank you so much for having this conversation with us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Sure.